I do believe that we have something that we can now springboard collectively to use the information that you're going to have, and you're going to find other little things that you can share with other people that will be kind of add-ons that you observe from your patients, that you'll be able to look at and say, hey, here's something we haven't considered yet. And these are the things I want you to look for, and then together we can all grow. I don't want you to think that this material here is an end-all. It's taken me many, many years to put this all together by studying extensively the irises of the eye along with the sclera of the eye. Now, where does this all begin? I first became aware of sclerology back in about the 70s and then in the 80s, and all of a sudden there are about 9 different schools of sclerology sprung up, each one contradicting the other. And so you have these 9 different schools all teaching differently, arguing back and forth, and all of them excluding the iris of the eye, all of them. And so I took a look at all this, and I realized that the eye is the window to the soul, not the iris of the eye, and not the sclera of the eye. It had to be united together. Now, we're going to be discussing this material. There's an old Indian medicine man by the name of Sundance. He lived in the Rocky Mountain area, usually in the Idaho area, and he used to look at people's eyes, and he looked only at the sclera of the eyes, and they would put them on different medicinal herbs, and they'd be miraculously healed. Now, we had Sundance taught another doctor up in Idaho by the name of Dory Denton. And Dory Denton made an impact upon a few people up in that area. And then a doctor by the name of Dr. Stu Wheelwright got a hold of the sclerology, and he presented classes in sclerology which did not fit hand in glove with the iris of the eye, but this, I believe, got sclerology off and going in the United States. And then a whole lot of people jumped on the bandwagon, and all of a sudden you had about 9 different schools of sclerology, all of them contradicting each other. Now, I threw the whole lot out, and I went back to the iris of the eye, and I went back to looking at the iris as related to the sclera, and I went through about 10,000 slides that I had taken of my patients. And I spent literally months looking at the sclera as related to the iris of the eye, and many times just ready to throw up my hands in absolute disgust, and because I couldn't put it together. And finally, one day, I saw one particular interaction between the sclera and the iris, and all of a sudden it all made sense to me, just like it was all there for me. And I went back and looked at the iris again with all the sclera markings, and I said, how could I have been so stupid as to not to recognize this? And all of a sudden it just all fell into line for me. And this became quite exciting for me. And so gradually I began looking at the sclera of the eye relative to the iris, and I began putting things together with different emotional things people were going through, different attitudes they were having struggles with, and suddenly it all became clear. Now these things in the next couple of days I'm going to be sharing with you, and hopefully you can add to it. Each of you are going to, some of you have a responsibility of taking this material and going far beyond what I have done with it. I know how difficult it is to discover a new modality of, shall we say, diagnosis. It's been a real struggle. But you're going to have the struggle to understand it and a struggle to put new information in here that will have bearing. But remember this, the eye is the window to the soul, not just the iris alone, and not just the sclera alone. The iris is 50% of what you're going to look at when you're looking at the diagnosis of an individual. The sclera will be the other 50%. The iris will not be complete without the sclera, and the sclera will not be complete without the iris. So you put those two together and you've got something very, very substantial. Now, I do believe the first thing you want to look at, and just keep here in front of you, you have a Sclera checklist for Sclerology. Now this will be brand new for all of you. The Sclera checklist. You have that in those folders in the back there that you can get from Steve and Lisa. They're just $5, and you have a pile of material there for both iridology and sclerology that you will need for the future. Now, if we can put up here, Anita, the first overlay there. I want you to take down very careful notes. There's a lot of information here that we'll try to cross-reference as we go along. Now, number one on the Sclera checklist. Number one. Here's where you, as you're looking at a person's sclera of the eye, okay? Here's where you make careful notes of all indicating lines. And you indicate each line with a time like on a clock. So you're going to have one at 12 o'clock noon type of thing, another down at 6 o'clock, other lines maybe 1, 2, 3 o'clock, whatever you run into, and you look at it as a clock. And then the A part here, you check the heaviness or the lightness of lines. Now we'll get into that, but if you notice up here on the first form, you may have a little light line like the one right up here, and that's no problem unless it is so light that it's barely perceptible. There has to be somewhere in between a light line and a heavy line where you have a normal indication that the organ is functioning. If it's too light, then that needs to be spruced up a bit so it's functioning properly. If it's too heavy, then we have to work on that particular area, showing that that particular organ is under too much stress. Like, for example, if we move this over, Anita, like let's say, for example, we're looking at a left eye, and we have this big heavy line coming in at 3 o'clock. Jensen chart, please. Left. And so at 3 o'clock, you're in the heart area. Okay? As you're looking at the chart, you have this heavy line coming in. Back to the line, please. And here's a heavy line here coming in roughly at 3 o'clock. Now, this actually is a heart line. Now, we call that a heart line. But basically, it is more than just a heart line. Back to the Jensen chart, please. Because we have the lungs, we have the heart, we have the bronchioles, we have the descending colon, we have the stomach and its function, and so all of these will be overlaid one another because you're taking a three-dimensional body, you're putting that on a two-dimensional chart. So even though we call it a heart line, what is causing that line to be there? It may be a heart problem, it may be a lung problem which is affecting the heart, it may be a problem in the colon which is affecting the heart, it may be a problem in the bronchioles that is affecting the heart, it may be a problem which will exist clear back here in the pupillary rough, which is affecting the heart. So you take that 3 o'clock line coming in, and you follow that all the way down through here and find out where is the problem. And it could be anywhere which I have just expressed to you. But nevertheless, all of those areas will all reflex to the heart. So if you have a problem there, you will also have a heart problem, because one will definitely affect the other. Now, for example, we find some people with a big heavy line coming in at 3 o'clock. All right? And we find that the heart is having a real struggle. And then we find after 6 months of cleansing on a nutritional program that they still have a very, very heavy heart line at 3 o'clock. Now listen carefully. We've talked before about angles of reflex. We have found that there's a lot of black sand over in this area at 9 o'clock. And suddenly the person passes these carcinoid tumors that are up to 3 centimeters in diameter. That's pretty good size. That's, for those of you in the English system, a little over an inch. There's 2.54 centimeters in 1 inch. And these are 3 centimeters in diameter. The person passes a whole lot of them out of this area. The black sand here at 9 o'clock disappears. And then suddenly, no more heart problem, no more heart pain, no more palpitations, and the line recedes backward from the iris. May I have this? May I have that, honey? The number 1 sheet again, please. Now this you've got to get. Now bring this so I can see it. There. Right here, as that's pointed in here, gradually as it heals, as this area heals in this indicator, suddenly this starts pulling back from the iris, and this gets a little hook on the end of it, which we call a fish hook, or we call some people like shepherd's staff better, but it's a little hook that's shaped like a shepherd's staff or shaped like a fish hook, okay? When that happens, we have a reduction in the stress on that particular organ. Now that might be pretty heavy. Now let's go back to the Jensen chart again. And we look at the angles in the iris of the eye. We have a real heavy red line at 3 o'clock, which of course we'll call the heart line. Now what we can do is we start looking over here at the temple forehead area, which is 120 degrees directly from the heart. And we find the person has had a horse kick him in the head in the forehead temple area, and he's got a big dent in the cranium. And so what happens is we work on the spine and the heart area, down through the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th thoracic vertebrae. We work perhaps on all the heart points. We work on all the foot points that reflex to the heart. That line is still there until we get into cranial work. And when we get into cranial work and the bone structure all changes, and that big dent in the forehead temple area, that big dent smooths out, and disappears, then the line is pulled away from the iris. Back to that other one, Anita, please. And this is pulled back again and starts getting the hook on it. And the line is no longer heavy and red, which is a danger sign for the heart. Back to the Jensen, please. So I'm going to show you what we look for. We look for the 120 degree reflex. All right? We take a look at dental work, which would be pretty close in the lower jaw area. And we find that there be certain teeth which are directly related to the heart meridian. And as soon as the silver amalgam filling is pulled out of that tooth, then that red line here in the sclera at 3 o'clock in the heart area is pulled back. Or if you have a root canal in that area. If you have a root canal in a tooth which affects the heart meridian, then that in turn, just a root canal in that tooth, can affect the heart. Now where is Maurice Finkel? Sir, would you come up here a minute, please? You charge? Well, you charge right on up here. Here, right in here, sir. Now so we have 150 degree reflex, where oftentimes the tonsils, for example, if there's a tonsil problem, at 150 degrees, we're right over here to the heart again. At 180 degrees, if a person has a problem in the trach or the esophagus, where they have trouble swallowing, for example, that can also reflex back to the heart, just as the heart can reflex back to those areas. Now let's say that you broke a leg down here at 90 degrees from the heart. You break a leg and all of a sudden you develop a big red line coming in toward the heart. As soon as you fix that broken leg that was never set correctly, then the heart condition comes right. We had a hand up. Yes.
When you're looking at the degrees, those specific degrees, whether you're actually looking at signs in the sclera or the iris, or you're just asking the client about those degrees individually.
You look. You have the slides of the eyes. Mm-hmm. And sometimes if you have, like people will send me their slides, it takes me 4 hours to do an analysis on it, but they send me their slides, they send me the iris of the eyes, and I'm sitting here in my mind going 30, 60, 90, 120, 150, another cup of tea, Anita. And this is and after going through all these different degrees, all through the iris of the eye, and Monique, the sclera of the eye, okay? After you go through all of that material, then you've got something that you can work with, and it becomes very, very exciting. And suddenly you find a problem area for point holding, for example, that if we hold this point, and this point, then all of a sudden the correction will occur. Now, I have found this to be true. I had one gentleman that had a frozen shoulder. I did everything for that frozen shoulder, and I couldn't budget. But when I looked at all of the different angles, 60, 90, 180, 120, and I got people, a whole group of people, holding all of these reflex angles on the area that you could see there's something wrong in those areas, from the sclera of the eye and the iris of the eye. All of a sudden, all the muscles relaxed, the calcification dissolved, and it came right. Now, I shook my head on that because I could put pressure directly on the calcification on the shoulder. Nothing would happen. It would not dissolve. But I had to attack that from every possible reflex angle to bring that about. Now, of course, he is quite insistent that he wanted this done, and frankly, it stressed me out because it's just like, sometimes it's like looking for a needle in the haystack. But if you go back to the various angles, recognizing that there will be individual positionings which are different for each person, and sometimes you might be off 15 degrees, sometimes as much as 30 degrees. You still go back and look and find out where they are in the iris. You look at the sclera lines, and then figure all the different angles of reflex, okay? And then all of a sudden, bingo, you've hit the magic combination. All the tumblers fall in line, and then the frozen shoulder opens. Yes, sir. Sir Michael, would you come forward, please? Michael, sir.
So, leading on from where Monique's gone to so far, I'm interested to know about classical degrees of reflex, and if you're looking at an iris, it may have lesions, well, if you're looking at an eye, it might have lesions in the iris, and it also might have certain indicating lines in the sclera. So we're talking about a line for the heart right now, and we've reflexed to the temple forehead, we've reflexed to the lower jaw and to the esophagus 180 degrees away.
Or even the middle of the back.
Yeah, okay. So now we had a strong indicating line in the sclera, you know, that sort of has preempted this research or investigation so far. So let's say we have another strong indicating line in the thyroid and the kidney area. After we've looked at the heart, do we then move on to this thyroid line and start looking at reflexes for the thyroid as well?
Exactly, sir. Brand new operation.
Right, okay, so we're just going to perform a whole lot of separate individual investigations for each one of these lines or lesions until we've just finished the whole process, and basically you just work through every sclera indicator and every iris indicator that you feel is of note.
Yes. Let's go back, Michael, if we can, for a moment, and hit a heavy thyroid indicator and a heavy kidney indicator. And if you notice, you got 30, 60, about 90 degrees from the thyroid to the kidney.
Yeah.
Let's say you're an athlete, and you're out running down the field, you know, and somebody tackles you and gets their knee right into your kidney. And it was a bad tackle, and you know darn good and well that they're trying to hurt you. You come out of that with an anger attack, okay? Well, the anger tied in by association to the pain in the kidney, the suppressed anger, because you know you'll be off the field if you knock his block off, okay? So you suppress all the anger and don't let it be known how absolutely furious you are. That anger that's suppressed will affect the thyroid. And so even though you have a 90-degree angle there, you have a tie-in of association between the anger, which affects the thyroid, and the pain, which affects the kidney. And so suddenly you have somebody doing a little bit of deep tissue massage, and they hit the area where you got the knee in the kidney. Right. You have all this tremendous pain in your kidney, and that will release the inactivity of the thyroid when you go back and re-experience it. That's how subtle these things are. You have an injury, for example, in the middle of the back, and because the pain is so severe, it affects the heart. But it doesn't have to be just the middle of the back. It can be anywhere in the spine where the pain is so severe that the heart is going to be affected by it. And so every time there's a little bit of pain, the pain triggers the pain in the back, and then the heart goes off. And you've got the indicating line in the heart area, because every time that you're out working, that one particular spot in the back is always hurting, and it's tied in with the injury, it's tied in with the time that is overstressed the heart at that very moment.
Okay.
So it's not just the angles. It can be just an association of two emotions, pain and whatever, at the time that an accident occurred to a person, which has nothing to do with the angles, but it'll be recorded by association, A equals A equals A equals A on the emotional level.
Right.
So you might say, well, then anything can cause anything. That's the point I want to make. So you can't be too sure of what you're looking at. And then you might say, well, what am I doing here? you follow me? And this is what we're looking at. Anything can cause anything.
Okay. So if I may just move along one more pace.
Yes, sir.
You haven't written any of this stuff down as yet.
No. This is all recorded here. This is the first time this has ever been recorded. I have never written a thing down, but it will be on tape recording, and it will be on the videotape.
If I were to study iris diagnosis in depth, would Bernard Jensen have any of these reflexes or indicators, forgetting the sclera, just talking about the iris, would Bernard Jensen, for instance, have any of these reflexes and associations written in his work?
There has been in the books that I have researched out, only 180 degree reflex has been referred to, and another time has been 120 degree trine has been referred to, but nothing has been done concerning the other reflex angles.
Okay, thank you.
That to my knowledge. If it's been done, I'm not aware of it. I'm sure somebody has stumbled on it because of the association with astrology with the chart, but I don't know if anything has been put down in writing.
Thanks.
Okay? Yes, Linda.
John, just following on with what you were talking about with
Speak right in that mic real clearly,
just
please.
following on with the reflex from the thyroid, which was an emotional response to the kidney. So that means any emotion, any of the 7 levels reflex in that area, the indicating line could be an emotional tie-in. It
Yes.
could not necessarily which obviously affects the area, but it's an emotional thing, not a physical injury.
It could be.
Could
But
be.
how can you separate the two?
Yeah, but I guess it's probably interesting from a point-holding perspective for the individual. I mean, not that you would know. You don't know that, do you? Does it come up on the point-holding? Is that where you actually finally link the two together? You have all these options in your mind and you link it together then?
And then something happens.
And changes
That's
it.
positive.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's go back to the thyroid here for a moment. And let's say you have a great big heavy line coming in at the thyroid level. And you have an indicating line coming in clear over here, you know, in the sclera. And it comes right in and hits that thyroid bang on. Okay? That can be an indication of a number of different things. And let's look at 180 degree reflex. So you go from the thyroid, and let's look and see what we've got. You've got your Pyrus patches right here, okay? Thanks Jensen for his research on this, because here, if you have a high fever, you have this problem. And until you get to the immune system, to where the immune system begins working, so you can go back through your old fevers, the old fevers will finally come up to the point where the Pyrus patches regenerate that were destroyed by the high fever. This is lymphatic tissue in the small intestine area. Then the thyroid will start working, and then that little red line, the indicator line, will back off. But it's not thyroid. It could be, it's in the thyroid area, which of course we know that if the Pyrus patches here are destroyed by the high fever, then of course a person starts gaining weight and they have low thyroxine output from the thyroid. Because if this is destroyed, it's going to affect the thyroid function. You got that? Am I going too fast? Now that's important. Now let's take a look at the chart for a moment and look very carefully there. Go across 180 degrees from the thyroid. Where are you? Where are you? Right across, over to here. And what's this? The breast. And so a person has a breast cancer. And so we work on the thyroid, which is 180 degrees opposite. We work and we work and we work on all of the vertebrae up and down the back, which would lead into this here. And what could the problem be? The problem could be a fever, which has not yet been re-experienced. It could have been a very high fever from birth, which can reflex directly across here to the breast area. 180 degree reflex. Those are powerful reflexes. Or, now we talked, last couple of days, we talked about strictures in the autonomic nerve wreath. Now remember what the strictures are? You have the autonomic nerve wreath and you have the stricture in like this. Remember? And I mentioned to you that a stricture in the autonomic nerve wreath will be an indication of scar tissue, which would be parasite related. Okay? Now that stricture in the autonomic nerve wreath, I think everyone has one of those somewhere along the line, nearly everybody. So the stricture then will always accompany and precede a cancerous condition, which we've talked about and gone into. So if we have a stricture in here, where we have scar tissue in the descending colon, and we have a problem in the left side of the breast, on the left breast, then what we have to do with that is we go in, and I have done this, we find out where the stricture is, and we go down the descending colon, and we find out where the pain is, and we gently press in the pain area. And you watch carefully the stricture, and you watch that stricture gradually move out away from the pupil. The stricture dissolves, and the reflex action into the breast is there, and then the breast starts to heal of the problem that we're dealing with. Another 0 degree reflex. Now what would happen if the stricture in the colon wasn't here, but the stricture was over here 90 degrees, or 120 degrees, or 60 degrees? You can have 60 degrees this way as well as 60 degrees this way. You follow me? Are you with me on that? Okay, so possibly, for example, from the breast area, what do you have exactly 90 degrees this way? 30, 60, 90. You're down here pretty close to the rectum, anus. You're down here to the kidney, adrenal area. And because of anatomical variation, you could be right on 90 degrees. Now we know that in astrology, if you've got one planet squaring another planet, you've got a little difficult time there, don't you? A lot of growing pains. All right? So, if you have, for example, the adrenal is exactly square, 90 degrees square, the breast, and you have a real black bush here in the adrenal area, oftentimes we'll also have breast conditions. And the person will have adrenal letdown, serious problems in adrenal, or a problem in the kidney, or a problem in the rectum, and a problem in the anus. I thought this was absolute nonsense until I started going to get more schooling from different people. And Dr. Robert Wood, who died at about the age of 92, was the father of colon therapy in the United States. He came originally from Tasmania, and he had what they call the Australian Naturopathic School. Now, I was trained under Dr. Wood in colon therapy, and he said the colon's everything. Now, each one of us, if you're a surgeon, you can cure everything with surgery, you know. If you're a naturopath, you can cure everything with herbs. If you're an herbalist anyway, if you're into aromatherapy, then that's the solution. If you are a colon therapist, then the colon therapist will say, well, life begins in the colon type of thing. Which I'm not so sure that that's wrong, because it fits in with everything else. But he would take a dilator. If a person was having a heart attack, for example, or an asthma attack, is there a difference? Bronchial, asthma, heart conditions. He would take a dilator and dilate the anus, and the asthmatic attack would immediately release. Or the heart attack, the pain in the heart would immediately release, just by dilating the anus. And you take a look, well, how many degrees are we? We've got 30, 60, 90, 120, directly to the heart, don't we? And we have about 90 down to the breast. And so if you have hemorrhoids, if you have piles, look at the reflex angles that could cause. Goes directly into the breast area. Another possibility that a person might have to tangle with. Now let's say you've had your hemorrhoids removed and you have a big scar tissue down there. And you've had it all anesthetized, you know, it's all numb in that area. Now maybe that has to be corrected, and then that problem can be solved. Isn't that exciting? It really is, you know. I mean, I'm not talking about the rectum here. I'm talking about the... I'm talking about all the different angles that we deal with when we're... and I'm not talking about the angle of the rectum either. But anyway, we're talking about all the different angles of reflex that each organ will have that we can investigate to find out where our problem is. And this is where we have to go out like a hunter. Now, where the sclera comes in invaluable is that the sclera will give you the heavy indicating lines that tell you those areas that need attention. And then you hit all the different angles from that, and you find one thing after another where the problems will arise from that one heavy indicating line. But remember, it's reversed both ways. It's not just all one way that the indicating line gives you a problem in that area. It can be a reflex from any other angle where that one organ, which is genetically weak, will be affected by it. Do you follow me? And if that one organ that is genetically weak is not working properly, it's going to show up in the sclera of the eye. And it's going to be afflicted by problems at 30 degrees, 60 degrees, 90 degrees, and so on, all the way around the horn. Any questions on that? Yes, sir.
Is this issue further confused by the possibility of reflexes from the left side of the eye and the left side of the body to the other side of the body?
Yes.
For example,
all points are bilateral.
so,
All points.
yeah, so the thyroid, for example, instead of just reflexing to the left breast, it could be a reflex to the right breast.
Sure. And what's even more interesting here is the problem could all begin for the thyroid with a 120-degree reflex where you have a lot of corn in the intestinal area, which blocks the nerve supply going out that direction, which 120 degrees can come right back in and affect the thyroid, which can affect the breast.
Right. And because of the 30-degree reflex within each point, it really is anything can cause anything.
Anything can cause anything.
It's not just a matter of going around 90 degrees at a time.
Poof. Now you've got it. Yeah. So you're looking now at a holistic point of view. Now, when you hold a point now, David, come on up here, sir. I'm asking you a question. You're the instructor. I'm holding a point, and I'm only holding one point, and I look at a person's eye and it's brown, and after I hold that point, when that person burns and burns and burns for half an hour or so, and I look at it again and you have a big ring of green around it, what does that tell? What am I supposed to believe? Because let's say I was only holding a thyroid point, and then the whole eye turns green. Why?
It's affected by the change in the thyroid. The thyroid comes back to perfection, and gradually the whole eye starts to clear up.
So the pain then that was simply experienced by the individual for the thyroid, how could that make the whole eye green?
It's like it's the key. Once the thyroid clears. Once the thyroid...
Directional, sir. Directional.
Oh, I see. Thank you. Once the thyroid starts to work again, the whole body system starts to work.
But is it the thyroid that makes it work? Or is it the pain that the person re-experienced, which would affect the pain in the entire body on a gradient scale?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, this is important because we think in terms of this causes this. This is how we've all been trained to think. You push this button and something happens over here, but basically if you push this button here on the thyroid point, basically you're affecting the entire body because the person is experiencing increasing ability to experience pain, which will bring up the entire body in its change.
Yeah. Right.
And that's why you have healing crisis in different parts of the body for one person and different parts of the body for the next person. It's never the same. Does that help you?
Yeah. I hope there's nothing else you need to know.
Thank you. I love the sense of humor. Yes, sir.
You may have already said this particular point, but I missed it. I'm good at missing things. In the case of the reflex points that we're looking from that original starting point, are we expecting an indicator in the sclera as well as the iris for the reflex point, or only necessarily in one or other?
Or both.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Should it be in both, or could it be a combination of both, or one or other? We're not necessarily...
The answer is yes.
The answer is...
And each person will have an indicator in the sclera, or another person could have an indicator in the iris. So you check them both out. And there may be no indicator in the sclera at all, and yet you have a terrible picture of things the way they are in the iris. Yes, Andrea.
So does that mean that the most recent injury would show up in the iris or the sclera? I'm looking at time.
I don't know. It would depend upon the nature of it. Now, what caused the injury in the first place? Was a person already genetically pre-programmed to have an injury in that particular area? And therefore, you already have the genetic weakness in the iris and in the sclera, and then the person just simply, in physical reality, fulfilled that which is already programmed mentally. Are you with me? And so, I mean, you take a look at that. So we have a whiplash. What caused the whiplash? Was it karmic considerations that we haven't dealt with yet? And that whiplash had to happen because we designed it, we wrote the book, it's in the script, and then finally we go out on the stage and get a whiplash. Please consider. And so it's already in the eye, but it hasn't happened yet in reality. And then a year from now, it'll happen. And you ask a person, my golly, you got a problem here with your neck? No, I don't. My neck's fine. But you got this big black line down through here, big radii scleris in the neck. My neck is perfectly fine. Oh, my mother had a big black line in the sclera, and she had a terrible neck injury. What was her age? Well, she was 45 when she had that line down there. Her grandmother had it too, and she had a neck injury when she was 45. We're 42. What could happen 3 years from now? You have a problem. Bingo. At 45, it happens. I had a man that had worked with body electronics for about 4 or 5 years. And he was all banged up during the war and had shrapnel and broken bones and everything. We got all of those fixed beautifully. Scar tissue was gone. He was just wonderful. And then he shared with me a little situation that everyone in his family, all of his ancestors, all of his relatives, his uncles and aunties, his own family, when they hit the age of 68, they died of a heart attack. So we kept working on him until everything in the eye was just fine. Both sclera and iris, nothing wrong with the heart at all. And he was out shoveling snow one day when he was 68. And he had a heart attack. Genetically programmed. And oftentimes we have these genetic programs within us that unless we're able to sort out the encoding or that genetic program, then bingo, we reach the age of 68, and no matter how healthy we are, bingo, we have the heart attack because we're programmed to have it. And this, I want you to understand, it's not just a simple iris or sclera thing, because you have your programming, which is definitely passed down from generation to generation. Yes?
So does the body electronics point holding take that into consideration?
Sometimes you don't see it in the eye, and you don't see it in the sclera because at this moment the heart's perfectly fine. You don't know what's in the energy field. And you don't, your hindsight was always going to be 20/20. And then you say, we kick ourselves all over the place and we say we should have known. But we didn't know because there were no outer indicators. And here's where we have to move on ahead with our memory until our memory is absolutely perfect over all the thoughts, feeling, and spoken words in this life. And then we begin to drift back into all the past life material, the genetic material, and so on. And then we start deprogramming that and changing our consciousness about it. But we can't change our consciousness about these things until we're able to re-experience the pain that locks us from that memory. See, the pain is the capstone to the memory. And if you can't get to the memory, then we can't change our thinking. We tend to be reactive. Now, we can control our reactions, that's one thing, but the reactions will still be there. And who knows how far back we have to go to get those reactions out of the way. Yes, sir. Come up here, please. Here, use this.
If in your family, say 30 people had kidney problems, if you had that kidney problem and then you fixed everything that was wrong with it, does that mean that the next generation would be all right?
Yes. Question is basically, if you have a kidney problem and everyone in the family has a kidney problem, if you fix that kidney problem for yourself, how about your kids? They'll be fine. And also, morphogenetically, what would happen to the kidney problems of the family? They can be healed more quickly, or they can be healed and the whole family can go through a healing crisis by our correcting our condition. And that has definitely happened. We've had genetic back weaknesses. The mother goes through her genetic back and corrects the whole thing, and all of her children who had the genetic back condition, all of those were corrected, and they were clear around the world. So if we have the ability to go through the pain relative to a trauma that we have, then that's going to affect our whole family. Now, problem. Let's say that we come from good stock, and let's say that we haven't had a real horrible background of pain and accidents and so on, and we don't have any real problems when our points are being held. Fibers are good, you know, no big black blotches in the eye, no big sclera indicators in the eye. What do we do? Now, this is what I think we should do, okay? You reach a point where the body electronics is no longer functioning properly for you. Nothing's happening. Here's where you read Book 1 of the Logic and Sequence and start applying the laws to our life, which can sometimes bring about more traumatic healing crises than point holding ever can. We go to chapter 11 of book 1, we read the list, and we start putting our list in order. That's far more difficult for us to do than feeling pain on a point. And the healing crises are even more difficult. And so we start applying the laws to our life and applying them diligently. And the point holding may be appropriate if we fall and sprain an ankle or slipping on the ice somewhere and hit our head. The point holding may be appropriate. But in most cases, where they have very excellent constitutions and no major problems, maybe all they need to do is clean out a little bit of mucoprotein, be on a good diet, and work on their thought patterns, which they already have access to, and learn how to control the three major energies. The energies pertaining to thought, the energies pertaining to emotion, and the energies pertaining to the physical body. Is this clear to everybody? Okay. Rob, I appreciate you wanting me over here in the spotlight for the camera, but the thing blinds me. So we got a difficult thing here, all right? I'll try to sneer, close my eyes, but that's quite a bright light. It's the information that's very important that we're going to get to. Okay, back to the number 1, please, on the Sclera checklist. On the A part, I think we understand this, where we check the heaviness or lightness of lines. We're going to come back to this later. The B part, check close proximity or distance from the iris. Can I have number 1 again, please, Anita? This is very close to the iris. Okay? This is quite far away. So this one would get prime attention. But if we take a look at these little lines here, and let's say we don't have any lines, and let's say that we're reaching a point in our progression in what we call unconsciousness. When we're unconscious and we're very close to death, there will be no lines in the sclera. And we have what we call an egg white sclera. It's a hard-boiled egg white. There are no indicating lines of any kind in the sclera. And the person feels no pain. Their body is absolutely numb, and they're down very close to unconsciousness. Please mark in your notes that I have seen people, many very ill people, who have no lines in their sclera, and they're dead within 10 days. Is that clear? Within 10 days. So what do we do with these folks? We hold points on them, we get them on a nutritional program, and then in the sclera of the eye, the little red indicating lines begin to form. First of all, very far away from the iris. And they start to very, very gently move in toward the iris as we come upscale from unconsciousness up to apathy. As we move from apathy up to grief, then those red lines become more intense. And they start moving in toward, but not touching by any means, the iris of the eye. When you come up from grief up to fear and you hit fear, the red lines are absolutely everywhere. They're all touching the iris. You have every single, the sclera of the eye is red. And you find that in grief to begin with, and then it's very intense at fear. They're afraid of what's going to happen, and they're bouncing back between grief and fear, and then anger and fear. And then a person gets very, very angry, and the red lines are everywhere also, but they're beginning to recede away from the iris of the eye at that point when you hit the anger. And then when you are able to handle the pain, then they recede just a little bit more until you hit enthusiasm, and then once again you have a nice clear eye where there are no heavy indicators close to the iris, unless of course something is drastically wrong. And then if it's touching the iris, then we know we have a problem in that area. So you might say, well, how do you know what you're looking at when you look at the eye? Are you looking at a person who has progressed up the scale of 7 scales? Are they at anger? Are they at fear? Are they at grief? Are they at unconsciousness? So here's where you have to know the person and then watch what happens over a period of time to the sclera of the eye. If the person is having endothermic reactions, the person is moving from unconsciousness up to fear. When a person hits fear and you've got bright red lines everywhere, then with point holdings they move from fear on up, and they experience at that time exothermic reactions in general. Now, if you have scales, we've talked before, we have 7 levels within 7 levels within 7 levels. So we can have many endothermic reactions while we're having maximum, shall we say, endothermic reactions. Or we can have these little cold areas of our body, which would be many endothermic reactions, while we have maximum exothermic reactions. It depends on where we are. And when we get the charts from Book 2 and Book 3, this will be fully explained. Now, so therefore you look at the sclera of the eye, somebody walks off the street, comes in and sits down, I want an eye reading. Well, you better find out a little bit about what the person's been doing, talk to him a little bit. And if you've got 10 hours or 12 hours, you might know very little about them by the time you're done. So there's a, I mean really, when you get to know the history of the person and what pathway they've been following, unless you have been walking in their moccasins, so to speak. You don't know where they've been, you don't know where they're going, and you don't know their current frame of mind. And even they don't know at the time. But you still look at the sclera, and this was telling you what's happening now. Now, the majority of people will be down below fear. 95% of the people or more have problems with hypoglycemia of one type or another, digestive disturbances. And so you assume that people are below fear to start with. In general, I'm speaking of. A person might be very enthusiastic about raising irises. Shall we say tulips in this case, so we don't get our things crossed. So people are raising tulips. They're very happy about raising tulips. But everything else they're apathetic about, and they don't want to have anything to do about it. The only thing they want is tulips. Now, if you're down at level 7, and I mentioned the word tulips, then tulips will have a totally different meaning than the plant tulips. We talked about level 7, and here's where the tulips will take a very physical appearance of two lips. I hope you have a sense of humor. That was totally uncalled for. Anyway, what we have here, when we're looking at a person, we're looking at the eyes, look at the indicating lines, and then you still have to consider what level are they working on, and then by point holding you can gradually see the sclera lines change as I have just described it to you. Is there any questions on this? Yes, sir.
If you find a person that has the egg white and no lines, and you start working on them, and they start getting these lines coming back, are they just going through a stage they were in once before where they had the lines and they disappeared to get to the egg white state?
That could very well be so, sir.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, to further complicate things, then take the fibers of the eye. And when your fibers are very dark down toward unconsciousness, and the fibers start moving anterior toward the front of the eye, and they go from dark, from black to dark gray, up to kind of a light gray to white, and then into a healing crisis white, and then back to white again, then you've got a whole different ball game to look at. And you tie that in with the sclera, and then once again you see what you're working with. So when we're looking at the sclera, you're looking at all aspects of the iris at the same time. The fiber level, the various positionings of the nerve rings, and are they convoluted way back down into the pigment layer, or are they all bright and white, where it's just like you have your heart on your sleeve. You react at the least little thing. And when the nerve rings are convoluted way down into the iris of the eye, you don't even know that you're upset about something. It's all totally suppressed. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration when we're looking at the sclera of the eye. It becomes quite concerning. And if you try to teach your patient that while you're looking at their eye, all you're going to do is confuse them at the time. So don't tell them. Tell them what to do. Tell them what to do to correct the major issues, and let the smaller issues solve themselves, which they will. And then as they gain an understanding of these things, then they'll realize what has really been going on with their body, especially if they have a good set of iris pictures along with 4 sclera pictures of each eye. Yes, sir? Okay. Any questions? Okay, that's number 1. A and B. Now the C part of number 1 on your Sclera checklist, check if it touches the iris. And you make a note of that. If it's touching the iris, you take out your body electronics flow sheet and make a definite mark there, because that's going to require definite attention. Now on the D part, it says, note as to whether or not the indicating line is crossed by a degeneration line. Now bottom line on this one, the indicating line moves directly toward the pupil. The degeneration line is a line that is parallel to a tangent to the iris. In other words, it's at right angles to the indicating line. You know what a tangent is? If I have a circle and I put this on the edge, on one point on the circumference of that circle, this becomes a tangent. So a degeneration line will be parallel to that at any distance you want from the iris. Now the E part, determine if any Y's are involved, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and we take note of those. And then at F, we make note of all double indicating lines, like we had on the slide last night, where I showed you just 2 heavy lines that were parallel to each other going directly into the heart. And then if there's any abnormal markings, we make indication of those. Now if you do this will take you hours. And so the best thing you can do is try to figure out what are the most important things to work on, and by solving the important things, everything else gradually takes care of itself. If it doesn't, and a person comes back, say, a month later, and has their eyes checked, you'll be able to look at that and see what the improvement has been. And if this one area over here hasn't been improving, then you make note of that, and then you attack that and say, this is something that we should look at and handle in our point holding. Is that clear? Is that reasonable to you? Okay. Number 2, Anita? Now this is what we call a degeneration line. We've got that down here in the lower left-hand corner. Just bring that over here for a moment, Anita. Bring it up now. The degeneration line is what we're going to look at and focus on here. Now, bring this back over again, please. Okay. Now, if we have a degeneration line like this, all the way around the eye, we have some very serious business where the person is under tremendous nervous stress. And everything in the body is being affected adversely. No matter how good a constitution they have, no matter how good the nutrition is that they're eating, they are doing something where even if you have complete good nutritional factors, because of the circumstances in which they're living in, the stress upon them is so great that no matter what you eat, it's all going to turn to fermentation. And the fibers in the eye will be moving slowly back into the pigment layer. And you watch the fibers move. These things get more and more complex, lines all over the place. These get heavier and redder until a person has a nervous breakdown. Now, often these things will happen when a person is under stress, where they're trying to appease their employer and they're trying to meet deadlines. And they're not doing anything that they want to do as an individual. They're doing what they have to do to appease somebody. Here's where you'll have the wife who's trying to appease the husband, and the husband has her under such duress she doesn't have time to pray or meditate or even go out and smell a flower. It's work, 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 work all the time. Now, what we have done with these folks, we simply find out, all right, what is it that if you had a choice, you would really like to do? And they'll say, well, I'd like to be a piano teacher. And then you tell them, okay, you go out and you become a piano teacher. Or, in the case of a minister's wife, where this minister, the minister's wife, she had to dress a certain way, she had to speak a certain way, she had to do everything by the book that a minister's wife should do, where she is into the shoulda, coulda, wouldas type of thing. You know, she had to. She was, I must be this way, and I must be this way. And then we would ask her, well, what would you really like to do? Well, I'd like to tell these people off sometime. I like to tell them what I really want to think. And I like to wear a different type of dress. And I like to have my hair in a different form. Go do it. Her husband had a fit. She was happy. But he was afraid that he would lose his entire fundamentalist congregation. Guess what happened? She came alive, she told everybody what she thought, and the congregation tripled. The husband sat back and he just kept shaking his head because she wasn't going by the book. What was she going by? Her heart. And she was happy because she was doing what she felt she wanted to do in good reason. You know, nothing really out of reason, but just in good taste, she was doing what she wanted to do for her life. And then as soon as she did that, all these lines with point holding to get out all of her suppressed anger and grief and fear and so on, all of these disappeared completely in the eye. And so when you have these degeneration lines, you know that the body is going to be under such duress that the person is slowly getting sicker and sicker and sicker. And nothing is working, especially the endocrine glands. Nothing is functioning. Now these, of course, these lines here will be an indicating line which will be tying in with the degeneration line. And so you could look at this tie-in concept where this has an indicating line and it's tied in here to this indicating line by this degeneration line. Do you follow what I'm saying? And this indicating line is tied in to the other indicating line up here by this degeneration line. And so we have, if we are considering a tie-in, then the entire body is all tied in to one big stress. And everything is affecting everything. Okay, may I have the next one, please? Yes.
Under that circumstance, with point holding, where do you start?
Which apple do you pick if you have an apple tree full of apples?
The closest one.
You pick the apple that's nearest to you and you pick it. Now normally, that's a good question, Linda. Now normally what I would say from my experience level is that you start with the STO point. And then you come down and do the pancreas point right along with the STO and the heart point if it has to be done. And then go down one step at a time down through the endocrine system. And so logically and sequentially you're going down through those points. Unless there is a prioritized point that maybe sometimes for an emergency situation you would work on that point, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't work unless you get the other points done first. So you have to just, you have to just kind of take your chances. Michael. There's always a priority point somewhere that you might want to just, what I call shotgunning that particular point, where you just go completely out of sequence in order to help correct a condition. STOs are mandatory unless you're having a heart attack. And you only have one person, so you hold heart points. There are exceptions to every rule. Michael.
With degeneration lines, is there any relationship to, like that slide we were just looking at, the degeneration line was fairly close into the outer rim of the iris. Now, of course, the sclera goes right out to the edge of the eye. If the degeneration lines were, say, a lot further out from the rim of the iris, is there any significance to that, or is there any difference between the location of those degeneration lines in relationship to their proximity to the rim of the iris?
I was going to talk about that later, but let's discuss that now. Can I have number 2 back, please, Anita? Okay, what Michael is referring to is this. If this degeneration line is right next to the iris, right down through here, okay? Chances are very, very good that we're dealing directly with what would be in the iris of the eye, in possibly the intestines, the stomach area, which are very close to the iris. And so basically zone 1 and 2 would be represented here. Maybe 1 would be very close, number 2 would be out a little bit, number 3 would be out to here. Michael, you got that? This would be about number 3 because zone 3 would be in the endocrine system where most of the indicating lines are pointed. So we go here to line 3, or zone 3, would be out in the endocrine gland area. Now if you're out in here further, it's zone 4, zone 5, and then clear out in here would be your lymphatics, your cell level, and so on, way, way out. That's the way I see it at this point of time. I'm subject to change. But this is how it looks like to me after looking at these things for many, many years. I find the further away you are from the edge of the iris, which we call the limbus, the more further we are out on the zone areas which are indicated by the iris of the eye. Is that clear? Now you understand the 7 zones of the iris. Can we put the Jensen chart back on, please, Anita? Okay, here's the chart. This is zone 1. Zone 2 comes out to the autonomic nerve wreath. And then zone 3 would be right here with all of the various endocrine glands, from the pituitary, the pineal gland, straight on around. And so the zone 4 and 5 would be kind of like muscles and bones area, on out through this area in here. Zone 6 would be the lymphatics, and zone 7 would be the cell level. And I think that this is where the where we could then, in proximity to the iris, Michael, then if we had a line right around close here, that would correspond with maybe zone 1. If it was out a little bit more, it would be zone 2. And then zone 3, as I showed you the other one, that would be almost in the endocrine system. Okay? And so on further out as we go. 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, back to number 3, please. Now, if we can move this over this way a bit first, good. We're going to talk about electric shock. We're going to talk about insulin shock or severe trauma, which can also affect the heart. Now, if we have a left eye, you've got your heart right about here. And this would be a heart indicating line coming in. You'll oftentimes see a heavy or a light line coming right down, crossing over the heart line. I have found that after a person has re-experienced electric shock therapy, quote unquote, it's one of the most barbaric things you can inflict upon a person because it takes away their memory and scrambles their brain temporarily. Okay? Your electric shock therapy, or if you're shocked by, let's say you're 220 or 240, and get a good jolt out of that, or insulin shock, which is used very similar to your electric shock to shock a person who is depressed, and so they can't remember what they were depressed about. And any type of severe trauma, you'll see these little lines crossing over the heart area. Not necessarily any other area, because these are very unique in the eye, and they appear to cross over only the heart area, all right? And so in our notes, we would put down that when a person is holding points, they're going to probably get very jolted with body electronics. And they zap, 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 zap for a period of time. And then as they get all this electricity out of their system in the heart areas, then this line slowly reduces itself. Now when I say slowly reduces itself, because it's a gradient thing. At first, we can endure very little pain because we're delightfully human. And so we might be able to handle maybe a level of pain at 15%. But when we get a good hard shock, that is very, very painful and traumatic to us, and it might be at a level 75 or 80. And so even though we increase our ability to re-experience the shock, it might be several years in the field of body electronics before we can experience that shock with a full specific memory where we feel it literally jolting our body as we re-experience the whole thing specifically. And then at that time, this line will completely disappear. Yes? Thank you. Here you go.
With the point holders, now if the electric shock is coming out of the body through the point holders, and that shock was that person had gone through was quite extreme, would that affect the point holders in their memory? Or?
I have had people who have held other people's points. Dr. Dwayne Eccles from California. Dr. Dwayne Eccles, I remember him so clearly. He was before he became a natural doctor, he was doing, I'm trying to remember what the name of it is when you're putting up air conditioners. He was a heating expert, and he was up in the ceiling on a ladder putting in the wiring for one of the blowers at I think it was 215 volts or something like that. And he was up there, and he got both hands up at the same time, and he couldn't let go. So he had to kick the ladder out from under him, and he fell 15 feet down to a floor. Now Dwayne got shocked very, very